Have you ever met a man who seems to float through life, never quite settling, never quite taking responsibility, yet somehow charming enough that everyone forgives him? Perhaps he's the friend who never pays his fair share, the colleague who avoids the hard conversations, or the son who never grows into the man he was meant to be. There's a name for this, a quiet tragedy that often goes unnoticed, and it's called the Peter Pan syndrome, the story of a man who refuses to grow up, not out of whimsy, but out of fear, confusion, or unresolved wounds. To understand this, we need to step back and reflect on what it truly means to become a man, not merely by age, not merely by strength, or even by societal expectations, but by the acceptance of responsibility, the courage to face life's inevitable hardships, and the willingness to build, protect, and contribute. The man who never grows up avoids this. He remains suspended in a perpetual adolescence, where fun outweighs duty, impulse outweighs reflection, and freedom is misunderstood as irresponsibility. Psychologists first described Peter Pan syndrome in the 1980s, observing men who display chronic immaturity in emotional and practical domains. These are not simply irresponsible or lazy men. They are often trapped in patterns that feel safer than adulthood itself. Safety here is not comfort, but a denial, a refusal to confront pain, to face failure, and to step into the discomfort of maturity. And yet, the irony is piercing. By avoiding adulthood, they often invite greater suffering, not less. Think about it. Growing up is not about perfection. It's about acknowledgement. It's about looking at your life, your choices, your obligations, and saying, I will meet this moment. A man who evades this, who dances perpetually at the edges of adulthood, lives a life that is fundamentally incomplete. Relationships remain shallow, careers stagnate, emotional growth halts, and beneath the surface, a quiet despair begins to take root, one that is often invisible to the world, yet acutely felt by the man himself. What causes a man to linger in this state? There is no single answer. Some never learned from example. Perhaps their fathers were absent or emotionally unavailable. Some were shielded too much from hardship, never learning the lessons that pain alone can teach. Others have been hurt, and in avoiding the risk of vulnerability, they have also avoided growth. And yet, the most heartbreaking reason is often a deep fear. Fear of failure, fear of responsibility, fear of standing alone in a world that demands more than charm and wit. This syndrome is not a joke, nor is it a passing phase. It is a subtle, slow erosion of potential. Imagine a man with talent, ambition, even great ideas, yet he hesitates. He procrastinates, diverts, distracts himself. Opportunities pass him by. Every choice deferred becomes a weight, yet he carries it lightly because he convinces himself he is still young, still free, still figuring things out. The world, however, does not wait. Time, indifferent and unyielding, continues, and the cost accumulates silently. Peter Pan syndrome also has a ripple effect. Women, children, families, and friends often bear the weight of this unfinished growth. Partners are left managing not only the logistics of life, but the emotional labor that should have been shared. Children may grow up with a father who is physically present, but emotionally absent, charming but unreliable, playful but inconsistent. And the man himself? He often wonders why life feels hollow, why joy feels fleeting, why success seems perpetually just out of reach. And here lies the cruelest irony. Maturity is not a punishment. It is not a cage. It is, paradoxically, the key to freedom. To truly step into manhood is to gain the power to shape your life, to hold agency over your choices, and to love deeply without fear. The man who never grows up thinks he is avoiding restriction, but in truth, he is avoiding freedom, the freedom that comes with discipline, courage, and authenticity. Neuroscience even provides a lens into this phenomenon. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making, impulse control, and long-term planning, continues developing into the mid-20s, but emotional maturity is more than biology. It is cultivated through experience, reflection, and challenge. Men who resist these experiences often remain stuck in reactive patterns, living moment to moment without foresight, unable to integrate past lessons into future wisdom. Consider the story of a man I once knew, brilliant and witty, admired by many, yet always transient in commitment. Jobs lasted months, relationships barely crossed the year mark, and plans were always half-formed. On the surface, he seemed free, untethered, alive, but beneath, a quiet panic simmered, a persistent sense that life was slipping, that he had nothing to show for years spent avoiding discomfort. When he finally tried to confront his patterns, it was late, but even then he began to glimpse a truth that had always been there. Growth is not optional if one wishes to live fully. There is also a cultural dimension to this. Our modern society, with its abundance of entertainment, instant gratification, and endless options, has created fertile ground for prolonged adolescence. The line between boyhood and manhood has blurred. Social media reinforces fleeting attention, celebrates rebellion without consequence, and often romanticizes the eternal youth archetype. It can feel safer to float in a world of endless distraction than to wrestle with the responsibility of shaping one's life. And yet, the pull of purpose, the desire for meaningful connection, and the quiet voice of conscience will not be silenced indefinitely. Overcoming this syndrome is neither simple nor painless. It begins with honest self-reflection. It requires looking at one's life with brutal clarity, acknowledging mistakes, habits, and fears. It demands responsibility, not as a chore, but as a gateway to autonomy. And it requires embracing discomfort as a teacher, rather than an enemy. Growth often begins in small, deliberate acts, honoring commitments, confronting fear, setting boundaries, and choosing integrity even when it is inconvenient. Philosophers and psychologists alike remind us that maturity is less about age and more about awareness. It is the conscious act of living in alignment with one's values, facing the inevitable trials of life, and embracing the privilege and burden of agency. The tragedy of Peter Pan syndrome is that so many men postpone this work indefinitely, believing that youth is freedom, when in truth, the freedom they seek is locked behind the door of adulthood they refuse to open. In this suspended state, the world continues without mercy. Friends move forward, careers advance, families evolve, and life, remarkably unsentimentally, presses on. The man who clings to perpetual boyhood begins to see the consequences: missed opportunities, broken relationships, and a gnawing sense of incompleteness. And yet, it is never too late to begin. Awareness, even belated, is the first step toward transformation. Even small acts of courage accumulate. Facing discomfort, choosing responsibility, and embracing authenticity begin to reshape the brain, the habits, and the trajectory of one's life. Peter Pan syndrome is tragic not because these men are irredeemable, but because avoidance creates needless suffering. Suffering that could be replaced by the quiet dignity, resilience, and fulfillment that comes with embracing one's potential. And so the question lingers for every man who recognizes a piece of himself in this description. How long will you linger in the shadows of boyhood? How long will charm and distraction replace courage and commitment? The journey of becoming a man is neither linear nor painless, yet it is profoundly human, rich with possibility, and ultimately liberating. Becoming a man is not a single moment. It is a continuous unfolding, a daily negotiation between desire and discipline, comfort and challenge. It begins with choices that seem small but carry weight. Paying your debts on time, keeping promises, facing conversations you'd rather avoid. These are the building blocks of character. Every decision to act with integrity, even when unnoticed, strengthens the foundation of adulthood. Emotional resilience is another cornerstone. Men trapped in perpetual boyhood often avoid emotions they deem inconvenient. Fear, grief, shame, or regret. Instead, they distract themselves with humor, novelty, or fleeting pleasures. Yet emotions, when acknowledged and integrated, become sources of power, not weakness. To face discomfort, to name it, to feel it fully. This is courage, and courage repeated in small acts becomes habit, and habit transforms into identity. Peter Pan syndrome also distorts relationships. A man who avoids responsibility cannot fully engage with others. Friendships remain superficial, love becomes conditional, and mentorship is scarce. Those around him may grow weary of inconsistency, unreliability, or indecision. Deep connection demands maturity, the willingness to be vulnerable, accountable, and present. Without it, even the most charismatic man finds himself isolated, longing for connection yet unable to sustain it. Education, in the broadest sense, plays a subtle role. Life teaches lessons relentlessly, but only those who pay attention learn. Men who linger in boyhood often miss these lessons. They treat mistakes as inconveniences rather than teachers, and setbacks as obstacles rather than opportunities. Observing life, reflecting on experience, and integrating insight are acts of growth. They transform failure from a burden into a stepping stone, a tool for the deliberate construction of character. Time itself is perhaps the greatest teacher, and the cruelest. Every moment spent avoiding growth is a moment lost, irretrievable and unyielding. Youth, endlessly romanticized, is fleeting. Charm fades, options narrow, and energy diminishes. The longer a man remains suspended in avoidance, the steeper the climb toward authentic adulthood becomes. And yet, awareness, even late in life, is the spark that can ignite change. Recognizing the truth of one's patterns, admitting past avoidance, and committing to deliberate growth can alter trajectory, even if the path is steep. There is also a philosophical dimension to this struggle. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke wrote that life must be lived forward, understood backward. The man who refuses to grow up tries to live backward in nostalgia, clinging to the safety of youth, yet the present escapes him. Life, however, is forward-facing, demanding engagement with reality, courage to confront uncertainty, and willingness to endure discomfort. Only by stepping fully into the present, with responsibility embraced, does life reveal its richness. Self-reflection becomes an essential tool. The man who seeks to grow must observe himself without judgment, noticing impulses, patterns, and fears. He must ask questions that matter. Where am I avoiding truth? Which habits protect me from discomfort yet undermine my life? What responsibilities have I postponed, and what will be their cost if neglected? Honest answers are rarely easy, but they illuminate the path to maturity. Cultural myths often obscure the gravity of this journey. Stories celebrate eternal youth, rebel archetypes, and carefree adventurers. Yet, the deeper truth is rarely told. Without growth, life's beauty is incomplete. Freedom without responsibility becomes chaos. Pleasure without purpose becomes emptiness. Charm without integrity becomes superficial. True manhood is not the absence of joy, but the integration of joy and duty, desire and discipline, spontaneity and accountability. Mentorship can also be transformative. A man who learns from those who walked the path before him gains perspective, insight, and guidance. Observing how others navigated responsibility, heartbreak, success, and failure provides models of resilience and character. But mentorship requires humility, the willingness to listen, to absorb, and to act on lessons rather than merely admire them. The tragedy of Peter Pan syndrome is not simply immaturity. It is the slow erosion of potential. Each deferred choice, each avoidance, compounds into a life less lived. The world rewards those who act, who face discomfort, and who cultivate character. Those who linger in boyhood often find themselves watching from the sidelines, lamenting opportunities they once held, yet never seized. And yet, there is hope. Growth is always possible. The man who acknowledges his avoidance can begin to reclaim agency, gradually replacing patterns of distraction with patterns of intention. Every deliberate act, every commitment kept, every fear faced, every habit cultivated creates momentum. Transformation is incremental, often invisible in the moment, yet undeniable over time. In truth, adulthood is a canvas, not a cage. The man who embraces responsibility discovers not restriction, but freedom. Freedom to shape his life, freedom to engage deeply with others, freedom to pursue meaning, and freedom to leave a legacy. Growth is not a punishment, it is an invitation to live fully, courageously, and authentically. The journey is not linear, nor devoid of struggle. There will be setbacks, moments of doubt, and temptations to retreat into safety. Yet each step toward responsibility, integrity, and emotional honesty reinforces the foundation of maturity. Over time, what once felt heavy becomes second nature. The burden of growth transforms into the satisfaction of capability, mastery, and self-respect. The man who chooses this path does not merely avoid the tragedy of perpetual boyhood. He experiences the profound reward of becoming fully human. He learns to navigate life's complexities, to embrace imperfection, and to balance ambition with compassion. His relationships deepen, his purpose clarifies, and his presence in the world becomes intentional rather than accidental. Ultimately, the story of Peter Pan syndrome is a mirror for every man who hesitates at the threshold of growth. It asks, will you remain in the safety of boyhood, charming yet unfulfilled, or will you step forward, accept responsibility, and become the man you are always capable of being? The choice is yours. It is quiet, often lonely, and never easy, but it is also profoundly human and endlessly rewarding. Life does not forgive avoidance, but it does reward courage. Every small act of responsibility, every embrace of discomfort, and every commitment to authenticity builds a life that is more than survival. It builds a life of meaning, and that perhaps is the truest measure of manhood. Not age, wealth, or charm, but the courage to confront oneself, to face life with integrity, and to grow into the fullness of one's potential. The journey is challenging, but it is also beautiful. The man who chooses growth discovers freedom, depth, and purpose. He learns that adulthood is not an endpoint, but a continuous unfolding, a canvas upon which to live deliberately, love deeply, and leave a mark that matters. And in that pursuit, he finds what all men ultimately seek, the quiet satisfaction of a life truly lived, not deferred, and the knowledge that he has finally become the man he was always meant to be.